This week in post, Unscripted and Uncut, it's a live edit. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're doing a live edit. Live is in air quotes, and what it means is I'm taking a photo I've never worked on. We turn on record and start processing, and we see what happens. I'm going to verbalize what I'm thinking and doing and seeing as I make changes to the photo. And there's going to be mistakes usually. There'll be turns and switchbacks, but that's where all the learning happens. As you try things out, we back them off, we figure out what's going to go on. So this will be a little adventure we get to go on together. And the photo I'm going to work on today is from Acadia National Park. I talked about some tips for photographing the park, and one of them was dealing with situations where you have people that are going to be in your photo. There's just popular places. There's going to be folks there. And I've got this shot from the top of Cadillac Mountain. This was at sunrise, and the sunrise itself was okay. A lot of people come out to see it. And so, instead of trying to figure out where can I go stand, there's going to be no people. The answer is there is no place you can do that. After I captured my sunrise photos, what about, working some people into the shot? And so you've got, a few folks here sitting up on the rock. They're looking out to the sunrise, which is off camera to the left. You see a couple other folks there. It looks like one of those is a fellow photographer. And so I want to work on this photo. And probably you're going to end up seeing the result in the previous photo because I haven't actually rendered that yet. This is the weirdness of doing photos and making videos and scheduling it all. So what do I see here? What are the things that I want to do to the scene? Overall assessment, the horizon looks like it needs a little bit of adjustment. I've got to rein in the highlights that are up in the sky. This section on the right-hand side edge here, that's bothering me. Probably just crop that in. Same thing with this little, looks like this is a ship that's coming out into the ocean there. Check for dust spots because I can see a couple of things here that they're probably birds, but they can be construed as spots. And finally is just overall, I need to bring some more warmth into the foreground. The sun did strike the rocks and light them up, and you can see a little bit of that, hints of that happening here. It wasn't a brilliant golden light, but there was some sunlight that was getting into the rocks, and also to bring up some of the greens and foliage, the fall colors that are out there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this little patch of water, which at this time of the morning was ice. I'm probably going to leave it in because to remove it entirely would look a little strange, but maybe downplay it with some burning. So with all those thoughts in mind, let's go ahead and begin. And let me start with the crop. Bring up the crop tool with the R key, and let's just take care of nudging that in so there's none of this little distracting element there. Nudging that in, and I'm going to shift this up. I'm going to keep the ice for now because if I do a Shift O as I circle this little spiral around, I kind of like where these people are ending up. Maybe I'll bring it down just a little bit where they're roughly on, a nice third golden spiral, and even these folks are as well. So that looks pretty good there. Oh, I forgot to check the angle. Let's go ahead and do auto. Nice little correction there. Let me do maybe the aspect. No, I don't want to do that there. Let me change the overlay to just the standard grid. That was the O key, by the way. And I'm just kind of scanning the horizon, and that looks a little off. Lightroom did an okay job, but that horizon's a little confusing out there when it gets into this section here. So that looks pretty good. Q key, and then we'll toggle on and off the visualize spots to take care of any sensor dust. Off and on, that's not a spot, that's really just things going on. Let me zoom in to this section here, and that's not a spot really, but we'll get rid of it because it's not really adding to the story there. And that's probably a buoy of some type out in the ocean. That was not a good correction. Let's try that one again. A little bit smaller this time. Right there. That's better. All right, zoom back out. A key again and checking for spots. Won't expect to see too many. This is going to be a kind of a forgiving photo because of all the texture. And we'll get rid of this little thing. Just for whatever reason, that one is bugging me a bit. Okay, that's I think it for spot removal. Let's now take a look at our profile. We'll start with landscape. That tends to be pretty nice. And I usually also like to take a look at vivid. It's a little too dark. Let's stick with landscape. That's a good starting point. It's a little flat, but we're going to get there. We're going to add some contrast and things first. Let's check our histogram. Looking pretty good there. Exposure-wise looks fine. We'll just do white and black point, so option click. We'll wait for the clipping to show up. There it is, up in the sky. Pull that back. Same thing for the black point. I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, Alt for Windows, Option for Mac. All right, looking pretty good. Exposure's fine. Let's do some contrast. And as I do contrast, we'll also open up shadows. I'm kind of watching the foreground here. Somewhere around there. This is good. It's starting to show more hints of how the sun was striking this land here. I don't want to open up the shadows too much because I like this darker barrier. So like this part's bright, these foreground rocks, these people are very clearly highlighted. And then we've got a nice deeper shadowed area. And then finally just the background there. Now let's take a look at the highlights, and I want to be careful with these. And the reason I say that is I'm actually watching the bottom half of the photo as I adjust this. I know it's going to rain in the sky. What I'm concerned about is taking away too many highlights from the foreground, and that's really what's happening there. So instead of doing the highlights with this slider, let's grab a gradient, drop it over the top. I don't need to do exposure. We'll do highlights and take that down. Okay, something like that. And maybe, let's even take the white point down a little bit. Nah, it gets too dingy. We'll just leave it like that and maybe stretch it out a little bit more. So that way I'm keeping the nice highlights and that golden glow that is on my primary subject, which is the group of sun gazers here on the rock, and not losing that. I gotta take a look at this thing here. I think this is shine through their blanket. At first I thought it might have been a flare of some type, but the way that it is matching up perfectly with the folds and ripples there, that's either an insignia on the blanket or the sun is just cutting through in between these two folks and lighting up that section there. So that's okay. What will we do next? Let's take a look at, I want to take a look at clarity and dehaze. Now the dehaze I'm thinking about for the midground. And so I want to play with it here, and I'll probably do a more localized version of it. But let's just start with dehaze, and I'm really just watching the tree line. The background tree line. It's actually doing a pretty nice job for the ocean as well. So I might have a bit there. I'm going to push it very far. Okay, and see what that does for the trees. Not so good. So just a little bit of dehaze, and I guess I'll take that back. I'll stay localized there. Let's now look at clarity. And again, now this time I know clarity is going to do a nice job on the foreground. As I adjust the slider, what I'm watching is the background to make sure I don't add too much. And that's looking pretty good right there, around 13, 16, whatever it ended up being. All right. How about some vibrance? All right, let's push vibrance really far and see how it's reacting. Okay, I like what it's doing in the foreground. I don't like how oversaturated blue it's making the ocean. So we'll once again go to our gradient tool, a new gradient. We'll drag this up and we'll choose vibrance. Where's vibrance? Oh, you know what? I forgot we do not have vibrance as a localized adjustment. Oh, that's going to be a bit of a challenge now, isn't it? Okay, so forget about that. Let's play a bit with saturation then and see what we can do before. I know this is going to affect the highlights up top too. After. All right. Second idea, and now I'm switching gears a little bit to that midground. I want to have some. I want to experiment with some crispness out there. And let's just use a radial. And the reason I'm using that is just to target this first side here. And we'll rein that in. I know that I'm affecting the ocean right now. If I hover over that point, we're going to see that mask is bleeding. Well, actually, I have to invert it first. That might help. There we go. Let's hover over that again. We'll see that mask is bleeding out into the ocean a bit. I'm okay with that right now. I can rein it in later if I need to. But forget about the exposure change. Let's pop clarity a little bit and see maybe dehaze. No, I don't like dehaze. It's making it too dark. Saturation. Let's push it really far. Pull it back. Saturation is not doing a whole lot for us. Do I like that better or not? So I can contrast between what does this side of the trees look like versus what do these look like. And we'll just toggle it off. We'll toggle it back on. It's slightly crisper. It's a little better. This is a subtle one, and you know, honestly, if I hadn't started this experiment, this would not have been a make or break for this photo. So I'll keep it since I've done the majority of the work. Let me turn on Show Selected Overlay so we can see that. We'll go into the luminance and we will reduce the highlight slider so you can see that now the mask is not affecting that here. This checkbox is new. I just updated Lightroom, and this is a nice additional feature. I can see the entire luminance mask. It shows you the masks now, finally. It gives you that, you know, looks like a black and white rendering of your photo, but it's showing you all the tones. And so you can really see, well, where, you know, what are the luminance tones in my scene. So we'll rein that in. We'll take that down. Clarity is there. And now I want to replicate that same gradient, or radial, and I'm going to move it over here. Tighten this up a whole bunch. This doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. The range mask is going to help us out a lot here. All right, we'll hover over that. That's looking pretty okay. We'll shift it out that way a little bit more so that I don't affect the person there on the far right with the blue hood. And let's see about toning that down even farther. Range that in. All right, that's pretty good. We're going to call that good enough. All right. Now something I think I forgot to visit is white balance, because I'm looking at this going, how come it doesn't feel as warm as I thought it would be at sunrise? And sure enough, as shot. I haven't done anything with white balance. Let's use our picker and find a nice basic gray. What I'm looking at is R, G, and B, and if those are close together, then that means we have a pretty good point for, you know, a basic mid-tone gray. 38, 36, 35, that's pretty good. Let's hit that. And that actually is kind of cool. Let's see. Auto shot was even slightly warmer. Okay, there is certainly some bluish casting kind of going on here. Let's go back to that custom one. And let's see, let's play. Let's play a little bit here if we increase the warmth. Now see the rocks in the foreground, and push it really far here so we can start to really see that difference. Yeah, that's certainly not how it was. That's too almost green. That's almost as shot. That's a little more in line with how I recall that foreground. And let's make sure that it's not doing anything too bad up in the sky. So back to as shot. Okay, the ocean's cooler. And then to custom. All right, so we've got a couple of approaches here. I like what it's doing with the foreground. I think it's a little bit too much in the sky. So I could either do a localized temperature adjustment to the foreground, or I could keep what I have here and then kind of counter it with a localized temperature adjustment to the sky and the ocean. Now we already have that pin out there for the sky and the ocean where we did some reining in of the highlights. If I just bring that down a little farther, and in addition, we kind of cool it off a little bit. Just a tiny touch too. That's better. I already like that better. So I'm going to do it that way. And what else do I want to play with here? Anything else? I kind of coming back to this little patch there. As much as it's right at the edge, it's not bugging me tremendously. I guess because its shape, it's kind of pointing this way. These are all pointing this way. This is a nice angled line, and it's drawing everything up to here. I think if anything, I might want to do, let's do a little dodge and burn, just a little bit light work, because this is not you know, an award-winning photo by any means. But I could see this being, you know, pretty nice for you know, come visit Acadia, and you know, this is a cool scene here. So let's do that little bit of extra work. All right, let's start with, we'll do a burn. Where's the burn here? There it is. And nice small brush. And just a little tiny bit over this tiny patch of brightness. So that's in there. And I'll bet if I take the highlights, we can even tone that down a little bit more. All right, let's check a before and after on that one. Before, and then after. Subtle, but that's what dodge and burn is all about. It's about, you know, subtle tweaks to make everything good. And then let's do the reverse for our main subjects. We'll choose lighten. That'll be okay. I might even add a tiny bit of warmth. Let's experiment with that too. And then once again, just subtle little brush. Kind of brushing around here. I felt like I just sounded a lot like Bob Ross when I said that. If anyone else thinks the same, leave a comment. Let me know if I sounded like Bob Ross when I said subtle little brush. You know, I'm not paying attention as much exactly to where the lines are going and so forth. I'm just trying to add in enough of a tweak here so that the subjects are standing out a little more. Let me hit the O key to see how well I did on the brushing. Let's make sure we get that shoulder, this person's hat and collar, this hood, and we'll fill in that part there so it's not completely off base. But it's okay if it's not everywhere. I'm just looking to accentuate these three people, not make them stand out dramatically. Let's do another before and after. And I'm just watching those three people, before and after. That's a nice touch. That's good. And you know what? Let's add a tiny bit. You know what? Let's do one more new brush, and we'll just make it a standard lighten. No temperature, just a little exposure. We'll zoom in, pan over to these two folks here, and just give them a tiny touch of an increase in exposure. So just a tiny bit of dodging so that they are also, you know, our secondary subjects in this scene. All right. And then we'll wait for Lightroom to catch up here. Before, I'm watching the two folks down in the corner, and then after. Yeah, that's super subtle as well. I'm not even sure how much of that's going to come through on the video. Last but not least, we'll finish this off with a vignette. So we're going to Effects. Just take that vignette down ever so slightly. Not much more than that. Anything else that I want to do here? I'm feeling that the sky is still a little bit bright and pulling me away from my subjects. Let's revisit our gradient tools. I have this one here. I will duplicate it, push it up to the top some. The highlights have been pulled down. The exposure has not been. I don't want any temperature change on this one. Let's nudge exposure down a little bit and see. That's too much. That looks pretty gross. Let's try maybe something like that. And what else would we need to do? Okay. All right. Now I'm really experimenting here. So this is the I'm coming back to. I like that I have a kind of a darker midground, but what if that were a little brighter and not everywhere, just like somewhat. So how will we accomplish this? I'm gonna use that new box that we have in Lightroom. Let me use a radial for this, for the luminance mask. So I'm gonna drag a big radial that will rotate and cover the majority of the midground here. Okay, Now we'll go to the luminance mask and show me the luminance. All right. Okay. Let's use the picker and see what it'll tell me about this stuff. I haven't tried this yet. Okay, so it's reining it into that. Interesting. Okay. So we'll turn that off. The mask, that is. Now, what does this... Okay, so what will this do for us here? Let me turn off the mask view. And now that I've got that set, let me do something outrageous that I can see what it does. Exposure. Go really high. Okay, let me invert. I'm gonna see how it is peppering it through there pretty nicely. Okay, let's get back to where we were, which was kind of more in that 25 range. 30 is going to be good enough. Show luminance mask. No exposure. Whoops, I meant to do an undo, not a zoom. Okay, that, and then maybe, what if I pop clarity? That's a little better. That's better, yeah. Let's do, we're going to turn off all the radials. Now recall this was the two added originally to do a little bit of, a little bit of work and darkening and not really dehazing, but adding a little bit of crispness to the midground. And then this other thing with the luminance range. So let's see, before, we're watching that midground, and then after, better. I think I'm going to back off the exposure. That seems a little bit much. Okay, all right, one other idea here, and this is again a variation of dodge and burn. I want to see about having my secondary subjects down here in the lower left a little more visible. So a new radial filter. We'll just draw it right over these two people, inverted, so this is only affecting those people. Let's zoom in so we can see them. Really tight here. Okay. And before and after. I can't really tell because there's too much changing in the background. Let's just do it with the slider before the exposure change. And then undo to do after. Yeah, okay. And the last thing we'll do is just use the erase brush with auto mask to eliminate that from in between these two people and kind of around them so that it's really just affecting their silhouettes. And once again, it does not need to be pixel perfect. It just needs to be reasonable enough and look natural. All right, so we'll zoom back out once Lightroom catches up with me here. Done with that. All right, great. So that is the end. I think I'm going to call this one good. And let's do a final before and after. So \key, original photo, final photo. Well, the tip of the week, I think, is when you're adjusting certain sliders, sometimes you're looking at things you're not trying to fix as opposed to things you are trying to fix. Like when I was working on the foreground, I wanted to make sure I didn't mess up the sky too much and to give me an idea of what to correct later. And that's going to do it for this week's In Post. Hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did, let me know somehow. You know the drill at this point. Comments below. You can contact me through my website if you got questions. And until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.